Right, hello everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to our last event of this online series. Yeah, I think it's been a really great series. I've really enjoyed it, and today is all about celebrating the kind of photography we do. So as if you've joined for all 4 sessions, we started off with our AGM and then a bit of a discussion around how we've all coped with COVID. We then moved on to a bit more of a photography management theme. And last week we had a talk by the Rijksmuseum about color management and in general how we can manage color when we try to be very accurate when we digitize paintings. And like I said, today is going to be just about doing digitization in the field, and we'll have 7 great speakers with lots of really interesting talks. So I'm really looking forward to this. It'll go on for a bit longer. So if you have to leave early because your lunch break is up, don't worry. As usual, we're recording this and you will find the recording on our website in a couple of days. So yes, thank you very much for joining. For those of you who have never joined before, just a few little explanations and housekeeping rules. As you will have noticed, you've joined as attendees, which means that you cannot unmute yourself or turn on your video. It's just to keep the experience just as smooth as possible and make sure that everything streams with a good quality. If you do have questions, of course, we want to allow questions from the audience. At the bottom of your screen, you will see that there is both a Q&A function and a chat function. We'll be monitoring both. So if you do have questions for the speakers, you can either type them into the chat or into the Q&A. It doesn't matter where you put it. We'll be keeping an eye on both. And then we'll allow questions to the panelists at the end of every talk. So I will be reading out the questions that you have typed. What else? Yeah, if you can, at the top right-hand side of your screen, you should have a kind of view option where you can either choose gallery view or speaker view. I would personally recommend you go into speaker view, but I'll leave it up to you, whatever is more comfortable for you. And I think that is it as far as housekeeping goes. So that leaves me with introducing our first speaker, Jo Castle, who is a photographer at the John Rylands Library in Manchester. And she will be talking about the digitization of the archive of Heinrich Simon. So Jo, could I ask you to turn on your video, unmute yourself and share your screen?
Hi, share screen. Okay. And it won't go into full screen at this point. Here we go.
Right. Yeah, perfect. That looks great. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so thanks very much, Kira. Yeah, I'm Jo Castle, a project photographer at the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. I joined the team at the end of 2019 on a 6-month contract to photograph one of the collected archives known as the Simon Papers. So Heinrich Simon was a German Jewish lawyer, civil servant, politician, and revolutionary who was not only one of the leaders of the 1848 German Revolution, but was also uncle to Manchester industrialist Henry Simon. And the Simon family, I found out through the course of this project, were highly influential in the development of Manchester as it is today, being a family of engineers and social reformers, it seems. And the Simon name can still be found on buildings and engineering sites around the city. And this was a funded project so that the archive could be translated from 19th century German prior to a book being written. And while this was not my very first job in historical archival photography, it was the first with a focus on text-based material. So when I was just starting, friends and family would ask me, what would I be photographing in my new job? And the best answer I could come up with at the time was a book. So I think it's fair to say that I didn't really have much of an idea of the reality of the task ahead of me, as the Simon Papers turned out to be much more than that. Turned out to be 8 books. One of my very first experiences on the job, interestingly, was attending last year's conference down in London, where I saw Gavin Wilshaw from the National Library of Scotland speaking about their use of the Book to Net Dragon system for completing a digitisation project in a tight time frame. And I remember thinking, wow, that looks really good. Pretty much all you need to do is turn the pages. I wonder if I'll be using something like that. And then I saw the Simon papers and realised that, unfortunately, such a solution would not be appropriate in this case. So the Simon papers comprises roughly 8 A3 bound volumes, which open to reveal a multitude of things. We have full pages there on the right, and on the left, I don't know how well you can see, but there's what looks like an A5 page. There's just a scrap there. You can see all these flaps running up the right. Because in fact, it has pages of all shapes and sizes, sucked down seemingly randomly, some stuck partially on top of others, got little booklets that are stuck into the middle of bigger pages. And there are small diary pages that are glued to one big flap of paper. So you've just got these little diary pages at the end, and they cascade down, as you can see them opening up there. There are drawings stuck into the paper or just left in any old how. There's what looks like a homemade cipher, complete with decoders, I think. Bits of plant material that have either been sewn in to the paper or glued directly down, including an actual loose leaf that's just loose within one of the volumes as a small leaf with a drawing on it that's less than 6 millimeters in length, and one very flat spider. So whoever did the binding went largely, but not entirely, in chronological order, which has resulted in each volume containing wildly varying page sizes and materials. And the variation in page size and the inclusion of all sorts of odds and ends meant that there was mostly more physical paper closer to the spine, resulting in pages that don't naturally sit on a flat plane when the book is open. So I think, yeah, as you can see near the spine there, the pages are quite thick, but it drops down a couple of centimeters as you get to the foredge. So yeah, we don't know who bound the archive into volumes. We know it wasn't Simon himself, but whoever it was clearly didn't consider how difficult they were making it for future digitisers. Fortunately for me, before I began, my manager, Tony Richards, photographed the first volume, working on a large copy stand using the IQ4 150 megapixel phase 1 back and XF body with 80mm and macro lenses. And in doing this, Tony determined, in collaboration with the collection care team, what additional equipment would be most appropriate in this case to complete the project. And what we ended up using was clear acrylic spatulas, soft leather weights, 4mm transparent nylon monofilament, and lots of bits of foam. And these materials were all chosen with the fragility of the volumes in mind and were cleared by the collection care team as safe to use. So a bit of a rundown of each of these things. I mean, spatulas were used as a standard tool, which provide a way to help keep pages flat if the paper has a curl to it, or hold parts of pages out of the way of the page underneath. And they are transparent, so anything underneath should still be visible through the spatula, although they do have a reflectivity to them, so you've got to be careful of that. But for most bound volumes, this would be all you would need. However, with the Simon papers, you would often have smaller pages in the middle of the volume, so to hold it down with a spatula would mean a large chunk of the full page would, the spatula would appear and shot over a large chunk of the full page. So in cases like these, you can string twine between two weights so that it forms a semi-taut line over the top of the page. And this can be used to hold down pages that have a curl and won't stay flat. Nylon monofilament cord was chosen in preference to tape, as clear plastic tape lying flat on the page would be reflective and create areas of highlight that would block the page underneath. You would also sometimes come across small items that would be difficult to hold up off the page below them, and the monofilament cord could be used to hold such items up and out of the way perpendicular to the page. for example, like that, where you've got a tiny scrap that's just stuck down right in the middle of a page. Yeah, so that could be held up perpendicular so that what is underneath can be photographed. To set this up, we use the circular leather weights resting on each end of the looped length of twine and to hold it in place. And we use those partly because they were what we had available, and we knew that, how to use them around the materials. But if they were to be knocked or the volume was to be accidentally nudged, they didn't hold on to the twine very tightly. It would tend to slide loose, which was obviously very annoying if it happened before you got the shot and you had to reset it up. But also meant it wouldn't hold tight in place and rip the paper, which is obviously the priority here. As you can see, foam blocks of different sizes and thicknesses were used to lift up the corners of the edges of the page and keep the whole page flat within the plane of focus. As I said before, the corners often dropped by several centimeters the further through the volume you went. And stacks of foam were also used to lift the twine up high enough above the volume so that it wasn't putting undue pressure on the pages below it. And this setup required building towers of foam on either side of the volume to secure the ends of the twine up high enough. And you would need to stack higher foam platforms depending on how far through the book you were, or if you needed to lift a small page up off of the one beneath it, as you can see there. Sometimes you would find small pages stuck to the middle of a large verso. So in this case, you might need to use the twine underneath that page to lift it up and hold it flat to the camera. As you can see, I've done there, just to try and keep that on a flat plane. Sometimes, for example, for the diary pages glued in a cascading fashion, when you get to about the middle of these, you had half lifted up and half lying flat, the ones lifted up would be pulling on the ones lying flat and vice versa. So then you needed to use two lengths of twine, one to hold the above pages out of the way and the others to hold the rest down. And sometimes there were multiple scraps of paper stuck down on top of one another, and I just had to try gently changing the angles and positioning multiple lengths of monofilament and stacks of foam to see what I could make work. So we've got a couple of examples here. This one you could see, yeah, I'm trying to get the angles on the twine to show up that bit of paper underneath these two on the left. And a similar thing here on the right, where I've, trying to lift something up that's been stuck partially over something beneath it. So yeah, in the early stages, a lot of my time was spent turning a page, looking at it, and then trying to work out exactly what combination of foam towers, weights, and twine strings I was going to need to get the shot I needed. Once shooting had finished, the next challenge was how to represent the pages as they appear in the context of the volume, but also present high resolution images of each individual item within the books. So this was difficult as some were tiny, but for translation purposes, we wanted to get as close a shot as possible. So a macro lens was used and the item was, filled the frame. In order to allow the researchers, as they requested, to see each item in the context of the volume, an additional full page shot was taken to correspond with each small item shot. And then we provided the researchers with two sets of images for each volume. One would be a full page shot for every, one would conclude each individual item that was cropped in, and then another set would have a full page shot for every item. So for example, here we have a page that has 5 small carte de visite stuck on it. So we would provide 5 of the left-hand shot, of the full page shot in one set, and then in the next set, you would provide the carte de visite close-up shots from A to E, so that for each shot, it has a corresponding full page, so that you can see, so the researchers could see how it fit within the book. So yeah, so that was my very first project, shooting printed and text-based materials. And it was a bit of a trial by fire, but it taught me a lot as it required such careful handling of the materials, along with some thought and creativity to complete the work and make sure that all the information was represented in a way that made sense. I learned that automated solutions will not work for all projects, and sometimes you do just have to use what you have, find ways to get the same results by doing it yourself. And I learned that photographing a book could be much more interesting and challenging than I expected. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the researchers come up with once the translation work is complete. And yeah, that was photographing the Simon papers. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting to see. Are there any questions from the audience? So like I said, feel free to either pop them in the chat or the Q&A. So I'll give you guys a few minutes and see if there are any questions for Joe. Claire is asking, how long did it take to do the whole book, or to do one book?
Well, to do, oh gosh, so there were 8 volumes in total, and Tony had already done one when I started. I believe the rest of the 7 volumes took between 4 and 5 months. It's difficult for me to judge how long each individual one took, because when I started I was going quite slowly because I was trying to make sure it was all perfect. But yeah, by the time I got to the end, I had got much quicker. We estimated I think about a month per volume, but it ended up taking less time than that.
Okay, well that's encouraging. And then Simon Barnes is asking, was it not possible for the volume to be disbound before photography? That would have made the process a little easier.
I think it would have made the process a lot easier if we'd been able to disbind it. But I think because of the way it was put together, it was not professionally bound. Lots of things were just stuck down or glued to bits of paper. So I think in order to preserve the items as they were, I think there is interest in who put them together and why they were bound in a particular way. And so the researchers were definitely interested in the volumes bound as a whole, rather than not just in the individual items. So yeah, we decided against that course of action and decided to preserve them as they were and just shoot them as they were.
Yeah, fair enough. And then there's a few more questions coming in from, this one is from Anthony Grand. Where did you get the twine from? Is it similar to fishing line?
It is similar to fishing line, I think. I don't know exactly where this was. As I said, this was something that my manager Tony had done before I got there, and it was recommended by our collection care team. In fact, they did recommend thinner twine, but because of the amount that we would have to use it and how long the project would take, Tony felt that if it was too thin, it might be more of a risk to the paper and to tearing it, so we went with the slightly thicker stuff.
Okay, cool. I've also just seen that Tony Richards has sent a message to us as well. He is saying there was a limited funding for conservation in regards to the unbinding of the Simon papers, and he also mentioned that the twine was from local art suppliers, so hopefully that helps. And then I think we've got time for one more question. This one is from Martin Passos. He's asking, do you clone the twine out in post-processing, or is it effectively invisible?
It's not quite invisible, but it's mostly, you can often see that it's there, but it doesn't obscure anything. And I would always try and make sure that I didn't have it running over text, or try and factor that into my angles. To clone it out would have taken a very long time. So as long as it wasn't obscuring anything and the researchers could still read the text and do the translation, we decided that that was okay to leave it in there.
Perfect. Okay, I think that was that was really interesting, and a lot of really interesting questions as well. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
And that leaves me with moving on to our next speaker, who is Martin Passos from the Instituto Moreira Salles in Rio, Brazil. And he will be presenting a talk on automatic cropping of digital contact sheets. Martin, if you wouldn't mind turning your video and audio on.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, as Kira said, I'm a technical assistant at Instituto Moreira Salles. Can I share my screen already?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm rather new at this position. I started in August this year, but my relation with Moreira Salles come from earlier when I interned at the São Paulo office, and so yeah. Today, so a bit of a background before I start jumping in the topic. So we are a nonprofit cultural institution based in 3 Brazilian cities. That's Poços de Caldas, Rio, and São Paulo. And we have collections in the areas of literature, music, iconography, contemporary photography, and photography. So there are 2 different departments for contemporary and non-contemporary photography. But yeah, the photography area is the biggest in the institute. So it's what we're mostly known for as well. So our collection includes comprehensible and complete archives of relevant Brazilian and foreign photographers. So for instance, we have almost everything that Marc Ferrez left. So Marc Ferrez was imperial photographer in the late 19th century and early 20th century. There was a fire in his studio at some point of his career, but everything that remained, excluding a small collection that is kept by the Getty Foundation. So we hold these items here. So thousands of glass plates from Brazil. And yeah, so another key aspect of our collection is the diversity of techniques and materials. So we have glass plates, daguerreotypes, albumen prints, 35mm archives from photojournalists, and born digital works from contemporary photographers. The problem I'll be addressing today, I think, really is a common problem among cultural heritage institutions. That is the bulk of digitization. The volume of digitization of items that need digitization and the scarcity of staff and equipment to do it. So in 2016 alone, we acquired this archive of a newspaper conglomerate, and it basically doubled the amount of items on our guard to over 2 million items. And as of now, we only have a single medium format digital camera that is the standard for archival digitization. And we're putting up multiple exhibitions, books, publications, and also we need to manage our digital asset management software. So we're constantly needing digital files for our objects. And so even having a single camera, even secondary digitization such as full frame DSLRs could not meet the demand for digital files. This is a little graph showing our collection's progression through the years.
Martin,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. We can't currently see your screen, so I think you've got to try and share that one again.
Oh, sorry. I was. That's okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. So just if you go into full screen, then
yeah. Okay. The past slides were all text, so it's pretty much what I said already. But
okay, so that's working just fine now. Thank you very
sorry
much.
about that. Okay. This is a little graph showing our collection's progression through the years. And you can see in 2016, the acquisition of the Diários Associados newspaper photography archive doubled the amount. So basically we have a fast growing collection and we are trying to cope with how to digitize it. So I think many institutions, actually I had the opportunity to be in the Science Museum last year, and I was talking to Adrian Hines, which is or was head of digitization at the time. And he was exactly explaining to me how they were trying to balance between, I would say, quality, but it's not really quality because they're still good pictures, but how to balance the description of objects and the efficiency to actually guarantee that all the items get digitized. So with quick math, we can get to a 3 years amount to capture all the items that we still have to digitize. And that's 1 item per minute, which is obviously unreal when we're talking about delicate materials such as glass plates. It takes way longer for each item. So we began experimenting with ways to best address this problem in a way that still delivers good quality images, but also that is more efficient. So Joana Americano is the head of our digitization team, and she and her team began to experiment with what we are calling group captures. So since photographic material is often stored in transparent sleeves that allow for digitization without having to take everything out of the sleeves, and we figured we could do group captures, which sharply reduces the time spent, but also introduces this second challenge, which is to separate the images contained in a sleeve into individual files, so we can see them better, and we can upload them in our DAM individually, so they have all their identifiers, titles, descriptions, and all the metadata individually. So that's where Grease Pencil, which is this tool we've been developing, comes in. So the method of Grease Pencil was done with this archive, actually, which is by Walter Firmo, who's a photojournalist active in Brazil and worldwide from the mid-70s onwards, I'm afraid. And this was a preliminary capture. It was made actually with a 5D Mark II, I think. So it's really old material. And it was a capture done mostly to inventorize. So for administrative reasons, we needed to know what we were getting from Walter to know the number of photographs and essentially have a document saying what we were actually acquiring. So it's a really fast capture. It's not archival by any means. It's an old camera, so the resolution's not great, but the images are there, and we had thousands of these. So we began experimenting with ways using computer vision algorithms to isolate these images in order to get them in individual files automatically. So because of course we could have someone to crop these manually, but it would take months or maybe years, I don't know. The complete archive is 150,000 images. In Chrome slides, I think 40,000. So roughly a third of it. So what the first approach to this issue was by using thresholding and morphological operations. So for those who are not familiar with these, thresholding is basically setting a value that separates foreground from background in the image. So every pixel that is brighter than that value is set to white, and everything darker than that set to black. And that gives us a binary image, as we call it, which is here. The color code here is a bit different, but white is yellow and white is purple and black is yellow. And here are depicted different values of threshold. And once you get this binary image, you can apply what we call morphological operations that are basically ways to expand and contract these blobs in order to agglutinate them and eventually get to the shape we are after. The problem with this is it involves a lot of parameters and fine tuning. So in order to get it to work, it took a lot of trial and error to get the right values for each parameter in order to get the blobs to agglutinate but not leak into the background. As you can see here, this particular one ended up joining the background, the yellow blob, and it ends up missing in the final image here. So after a lot of trial and error, we finally managed to get it to work in one test sleeve, which is the one I presented here. Only to find that it was a complete chaos in the next sleeve. So the parameters would be different for each sleeve, and rendering impossible to address this situation with this approach, because obviously it would take different values for each sleeve, because it depends on, well, essentially how bright and dark the pictures are and the distribution of the dark areas in the frame. So you can see this, I think you can see my mouse here, right? You can see this one, which has this dark borders, was really difficult because we needed to make the areas join in order to get the correct ratio here. But as I said, it became clear it would not work for mass processing. So we turned ourselves to another computer vision technique called template matching, which is basically you provide an image and tell the computer to find that image inside another source image. So in this case, I'm not using an image itself. I'm building this geometry with code. So it's essentially a dark square surrounded by a white area with a medium gray rectangle in the middle. And of course, I can rotate the shape. So what we're doing is basically asking the computer to find this shape in the source images. And the script I wrote also loops over different sizes of this template, because of course, in this case, you can see the slides were framed very tightly. So it's pretty much the width of the image is the width of 4 slides, minus the little gaps between them. So of course, if you're working with homogeneous materials and the slide width is always the same, I inserted a way that you can provide this and greatly reduce the processing time. But if you're working with mixed media, so different camera heights, different resolutions, this is a bit slower, but it works for all cases. So it loops over different sizes and picks the best match among them. And what it returns me is this image, these two on the left. All the bright yellow dots are the centers of the matches it found. So you can see the grid, the slide grid is really well represented here with these dots. And what I do is I perform a search for the horizontal template and the vertical one, and I compare the values for both. So I know where the vertical match coefficient is greater than the horizontal. I know it's a vertical picture, and else it's a horizontal picture. And this allows me having the center of the slides and knowing the slide width. I know by the ratio of the slides, even across manufacturers, this ratio, so where the image actually starts in comparison to the slide edge, it's constant. Sometimes the edge is a bit round or is sharp, but the geometry is pretty constant across all slides we found. So having the center, I can draw this cropping windows automatically, and this and then save these sub images into individual files. I'm gonna actually demonstrate now how it works. So it's a really simple command line interface. You just call the script, and it has a few options. So you set the input path and the output path. So the input is a folder containing your sleeve captures. Output would be, am I running out of time? Oh, sorry, no. And then output would be where you want the individual pictures to go. Template with, as I said, if you're working with a constant material that is been digitized at once and it's all the same across all the images, then you can provide the width, so you can quickly inspect in Photoshop or something else and get how many pixels wide the slides are. And so this will eliminate the looping process I mentioned. It will just go straight for the size that you provided because it's the right one. Maximum trim is so because of slight variations of the image inside the slide. Some images end up with black borders, sometimes on the top, sometimes on the left, sometimes in two sides. So I implemented a trimming step where I crop dark pixels from the edges of the image. Of course, if your image is too dark, it will not know that, and it might eat in a bit of your image. That's why you can set how many pixels you want to trim in order to avoid trimming too much of dark images, especially when the edges are dark. The center doesn't matter too much. And number of columns. So the default is 4, because we were working with this vertical print file sleeves. And I assume people normally frame would take the most out of the camera resolution, so there's not much room. But there could be cases where the slides are smaller, and so it's the number of columns that takes the starting size for the loop. So it starts at 1/4 of the image, of the source image width, and then it diminishes by 10% every time until it finds the best match. But as I will demonstrate now, sometimes you have a horizontal print file, and then you how many columns there are. So here, really quick, this is my input folder. You can see it's the same image I shown in the presentation, and another one is a horizontal one with 5 columns, and you can see they're not really
Martin?
straightened. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, just quickly, you're sharing your program, not your screen, so we can currently only see PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, my bad.
No worries.
Let me stop share and then share again. I'll just do the whole desktop. So this is the same image, and this is another print file. You can see the images are not really leveled. Some of the slides are a bit crooked, but it works nonetheless. And they're also different. They have different resolutions. They were made with different cameras, I believe. But as you see, I can here come and I'm going to call Python modules slides.py, and then I'm gonna grab my input folder, paste it here. Sorry, needs to be wrapped. Then my output folder is the same, but output here. And actually, I'm just gonna run it this way. I'm not gonna provide a template with, because it's different across the 2 files. And it will print a few feedback messages here. It will take a while because it's looping, especially the first image, the horizontal one. But bear with me. And you see unsatisfactory results, trying again. So this is it's looping and trying to find the best size. And then it saved the 20 images from the first one. So here they are. So again, these were really preliminary files. So the end images are 600 pixels only wide. But of course, if you would to do this with a phase 1 camera, for instance, if I'm not mistaken, you would end up with 1500 pixel wide images, which is rather decent for many uses, including web publishing if you're so inclined. So by all means, this is not a final, of course, I would not print this and put on a wall or on a book, but there are many uses that could benefit from these images being generated quickly. The second one is still working out. Of course, if I had determined the slide width and said, okay, look for a 900 wide slide, this would be way faster. And the benefit of being a script is that even though it takes a while, you can always leave it running overnight or on the weekend. It doesn't need to. So yeah, here are the files again. So that crooked image, for instance, you can see it's still crooked here, but well, it's usable for many cases. And these are the statistics of this test batch that we did. So I ran it in 2 batches. First one with it dumped 21,000 images. The second one 18,000, out of which 36 and 3 were blank. So sometimes it gets blank areas and thinks it's a photograph. After revision, so it's not fail-safe again, it will need someone to revise the output of it. So after revision, we came to the conclusion that the second batch was missing only 71 pictures of the 18,000. Wrongfully oriented. So I think I even have an example here. So what happens when your image is too dark on the edges? Sometimes it thinks a horizontal picture is a vertical one. This is something I'm still trying to address to see how I can improve the detection of the orientation, because sometimes if the areas in the edges are too dark, it might get it wrong. So yeah, it detected 99%, and out of these, the orientation was correct 99.7%. So yeah, it's really satisfactory for our uses so far. And so what comes next? We plan to develop this to detect and isolate other kinds, so 35 millimeter, medium format in all its ratios, so 6x6, 6x7, 6x9, and so forth, so on. I also plan to include some renaming options in the command line interface, because one use I thought of Grease Pencil is to create machine learning data sets. So you can, as you process the sleeves, you could label the files with known data. So for instance, you could print the photographer's name on the file or something like that. And then you get this data and it's labeled already, so you can train classifiers, or you can fix a size. You can, if you determine a fixed size and you get all your images in a homogeneous way for clustering and unsupervised learning applications. So these are all in the project's horizon. And here is just a quick example of the forthcoming functionality. So medium format individual frames are really, really easy to isolate given their contrast to the background. So this is probably the next one I'll implement to look for individual 6x6 or whatever ratio files, and even to address the rotation, maybe to straighten the file before saving it, because you can see in this one how it's not really leveled. Maybe we could rotate this before saving the file. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching, and feel free to reach out in my email or check out the project at GitHub, and I'll be happy to answer any questions now.
Great, thank you very much, Martin. I think we've got time for just one question, if that's okay, from the audience. Obviously, if you've got questions for Martin that we're not able to answer today, just feel free to email him later on. He's left the email, so if you haven't been able to write it down now, you'll find it in the video recording that we'll upload later this week. But yeah, Martin, there's one question from Yair who's asking, if you needed to capture the cardboard or plastic frames around the negatives as well, would that be via adding negative trimming or via setting a different template with larger boxes?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. It's if you needed to capture the cardboard or plastic frames as well, would that be via adding negative trimming or via setting a different template with larger boxes?
I would just, so when I detect the slide, I get the center of it. I draw the cropping window. I could just say crop the whole slide, because the template is the whole slide. Actually, what I'm doing is trimming inside it. So I would just, yeah, that's something actually to add to the. I could give this option to give you the whole frame, but as of now, it automatically looks for the image inside.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll just quickly move on, but thank you very much, Martin. That was really
my pleasure.
And like I said, I think people can email you if they've got any more questions. So the next speaker we have is Stephen Chapman, who's a senior photographer for the Royal Collection, or was a senior photographer for the Royal Collection for over 30 years. And he has sent us a video on photographing Japanese swords, and he'll be available for questions afterwards. So I'll just be running that video from my computer.
A member of the Royal Collection photographic team. Hi, my name is Stephen Chapman. I was until recently a member of the Royal Collection photographic team. I'm talking today about photographing Japanese samurai swords, and in particular I will be looking at photographing the blades of the swords and the conventions surrounding this style of photography. Last year, I went down to the Royal Collection's new conservation studios in Windsor to shoot a whole batch of Japanese arms and armour for this exhibition catalogue. The exhibition was postponed because of COVID, but the catalogue was still brought out in May and is on sale. The batch of items I had to photograph included several spectacular armours. Here are a couple from the PDF of the catalogue. And they included this one, which incredibly was sent by the Emperor of Japan to King James I in 1613, thus opening formal diplomatic relations between Britain and Japan. There was a variety of arms, including a bow, some guns, and some polearms, but most of the work consisted of shooting swords. On this layout, you can see a shot of the blade next to the detail of the tang. Each of the swords and daggers I photographed required a shot of this type, and it's this specific type of shot that is the subject of my talk today. I worked closely with two conservators on this project, and they showed me reference shots of what they wanted, which came from the Tokyo Fuji Art Museum. My photographs are fairly closely modelled on examples from this catalogue. Francesca, one of the conservators, kindly sent me this snap of the cover, and this one of a page layout with swords. This snap, in fact, gives a slightly wrong impression. If you search for swords on the Tokyo Fuji Art Museum website, you can find examples of their excellent photography, and it's actually darker and more contrasty than it looks here. Simon, the Queen's armourer, and Francesca were clear that this was the approach they required, because, they explained, photography of Japanese swords is governed by a well-established set of conventions. Note the vertical presentation of the blades. Again, this seems to be the convention, and one which is observed in the Royal Collection catalogue. I've taken the liberty of rotating my shots 90 degrees throughout this presentation so that you can see more detail. I did some searching on the internet to try and find out more about how and when this style of photography originated. Unfortunately, though, I didn't come up with very much. This image is from 1955, and I came across one or two low-res images that looked much older, possibly late 19th century. So what exactly does this style of photography consist of? First, the blades are all shown on their own, that is, without their scabbard or any of their fittings. Let's quickly look at the fittings. The following examples are all taken from the larger sword at the top of this shot. Here's the collar that holds the guard in place. This is the guard, front and back. And here is a detail of the handle. On the right side, you can see a circular brown thing, which is the top of the bamboo pin that secures the fittings to the blade. And lastly, this is the pommel. So why is the blade illustrated without these elements? Probably because the blade is the most revered part of the sword. They were often held within families for many generations, and some were periodically remounted with new fittings. For instance, the blade on the bottom right has 2 holes in the tang, indicating that the blade was remounted. In fact, the blade is about 500 years older than the early 19th century fittings. Looking at this blade from the smaller of the 2 swords in that pair with gold lacquer scabbards we saw a few moments ago, you can see that the idea is to try and articulate the different planes of the sword with light, getting gradually darker as you move across the blade from the cutting edge towards the back edge or spine of the blade, which is brightly illuminated to create a clear outline. In addition, the tip of the blade is catching the light, and the tang of the blade, where the handle would go, is also more illuminated. This shot shows the setup I used. Firstly, I put some black velvet-like material on the floor. Then I suspended a sheet of thick perspex about 40 centimetres above it, using 4 weighted retort stands with clamps. The sword was placed carefully on the perspex by conservators. The camera was mounted above the sword on a camera stand, and the position of the camera was offset slightly so that you don't end up with its unwanted reflection on the surface of the blade. Let's look now at the finished image while I talk about the lighting. All of the lights are in close or very close to the blade. The light on the cutting edge side of the blade comes from a strip light, a long thin softbox at a low angle to the blade, like a raking light. Sometimes I had to put a second shorter strip light alongside it to create a continuous illumination along the edge of the sword where the blade curves away from the main light towards its tip. The spine of the blade was lit by another strip light, but this time lower down, actually resting on the floor and tilted upwards on foam blocks. A small softbox of about 30 by 40 centimetres was placed at one end of the sword and pointed downwards from a height of about 70 centimetres to illuminate the tang. And it's in close again, which is why its light doesn't seem to travel very far along the blade. Another small softbox was positioned slightly above the other ends of the blade to fill the triangular facet of the sword's tip with light. I found that small differences in the positioning of that light on the tip could make a big difference, as these two shots illustrate. Francesca pointed out that the highly reflective surface of a samurai sword is really just the most superficial aspect of the object, and that if you spend time looking at one of the blades, there is so much more to see. And that's what this odd-looking style of photography is about, revealing information about the artistry and skill of the sword maker. In this close-up, you can see just how much detail of the fine structure of the metal is made visible by the lighting. In the catalogue, Greg Irvin writes, "The unique method of creating a Japanese blade involves folding, hammering, and combining billets of a high and low carbon steel to form many layers. The result is a sword with a resilient core and a hard outer layer capable of cutting without breaking or bending. This accounts for the samurai sword's formidable reputation as a combat weapon. But beyond that, there was an aesthetic dimension in which sword makers were able to demonstrate their skill to a knowledgeable and appreciative class of powerful and wealthy patrons. This they achieved through experimenting with different tempering patterns and creating subtle variations in the crystalline structure of the metal. There was and is a whole system of connoisseurship based around the mastery of these subtle effects. This 19th century sword was a gift from Japan to Queen Victoria. It has this lovely lacquer scabbard with alternating bands of mother of pearl. The blade demonstrates a marked hamon, meaning temper pattern, and this particular type is known as horse teeth. These temper patterns are created by artfully coating certain parts of the blade with a ceramic paste after forge welding and before quenching in a tank of water. The ceramic selectively inhibits the metal's rate of cooling, thus creating a delicate variation in crystalline structure which produces the pattern. The blade of this 18th century sword has another style of hamon called notare in Japanese. Adjacent to the cutting edge, you can see a crystalline structure which is referred to as sunagashi, or in English, drifting sands. Sword makers signed their work. The signatures were placed on the tang of the swords. Sword polishers also left their mark, and that's what these smoky parallel lines are, which sit beneath the collar on the side of the blade, appearing here on both sides of the sword. Wherever you look on these swords, you will find a remarkable level of skill and attention to detail. Consider the maker's mark we just saw, normally hidden from view under the handle. At first glance, the characters look incised. In fact, all the lines are made with carefully placed punch marks. As we zoom in, you can see how at the tail of a line, the marks become gradually smaller and lighter to achieve a delicate tapering effect. A similar level of finesse can be seen on the guard of the sword given to Queen Victoria. The dark metal is called shakudo, a patinated alloy of copper and gold. It has a dimpled surface. Close inspection reveals that each of the dimples is made with a punch with a tiny dome-shaped cavity in its tip. The decoration on the guard is both delicate and yet somehow forceful and robust. It's great the way the dragons seem to twist in and out of both sides of the guard. There's a humorous quality about the dragons, but there's also something determined and implacable in their faces, and it's hard to know if they're playing or trying to tear their way through the metal so they can fight. And it's an ambiguity which is very much in keeping with the character of these objects, which are both deadly weapons and exquisitely crafted works of art.
Right. So that was Stephen's video, and we also have Stephen here to answer some of your questions if you have any, and I believe he will also be joined by the conservator who worked on this project. So Stephen, Francesca, could I ask you to unmute yourself and turn on your video?
When I try to start my video, it says unable to do so because the host has stopped it. Okay, there we go. Good.
Brilliant.
Hey,
okay, well, hello everyone.
Hey.
So let's give the audience a few moments to type in questions. But while we're waiting for them, just absolutely stunning images, Stephen. Like really impressive.
Oh, thank
was
you.
a joy to see and watch.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.
I think that's actually echoed by Claire Collins, who's also just typed in beautiful images. So
Oh, wow,
yeah.
thank you.
I think while we're waiting, I was like, what was the kind of, obviously you've very briefly shown the photography setup that you had for the sword, but then at the beginning you were also showing samurai armor, and in general, like it looked, just like I said, it looked really crisp and stunning photography. So I was just wondering, what kind of challenges from a photographic perspective were those objects giving you?
Do you mean specifically the armors?
Either, whichever one was giving you a lot of challenges, or if neither was, because you know exactly.
I think I mean I suppose the subject of the talk is about doing this kind of weird looking photography where the blades, counterintuitively look dark rather than shiny, which is, how everyone thinks of a samurai sword as very shiny. And, for me, this was just a completely unfamiliar request. And I basically had absolutely no idea how to do it, and had to do quite a lot of experimentation and figuring it out. We asked Greg Irvin, who's the curator from the V&A, who's contributed to our Royal Collection catalogue, writing about the arms and armour, because he'd actually seen Japanese swords photographed in Japan. And the only thing that he could remember was that he thought that they were photographed in a glass box. And so that's all I had to go with, this idea of a glass box. And actually, with hindsight, the benefit of hindsight, I can see the value of having a glass box, because I did it on perspex. And the perspex, even though it was very thick and it was supported on all four corners, it tended to flex slightly, which would mean that the plane of focus was just sort of subtly changing every time you moved the sword or you put a different sword on. And I suddenly realized that if you had a glass box without a lid, if you imagine something like a transparent coffin-shaped box, then the sides would have perfectly stabilized the base, and so photographers wouldn't have had any of those kind of problems with it flexing.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense, because I've had to do some product photography, but on the other way around, so like on a pure white background, and I was also using perspex, but I had the same issue that it bent a little bit. We've got a question from Rachel Pete. Hopefully I've pronounced that surname correctly. She's saying, thanks, Stephen. Will the techniques you developed for the swords inform your photography of other metalwork in the future, such as, for example, silverware?
No. No, not at all. Definitely not. I mean, silver's almost like, the exact opposite of photographing those Japanese swords. Where with silver you're trying to kind of pretty much fill all the surfaces with light so that everything looks very sort of, silvery, and then you'll just sort of artfully put in little bits of black here and there just so that it's got a bit of punch and a bit of sense of solidity. So it's an incredible, sort of almost diametrically opposite sort of photographic challenge. Quite difficult as well, actually. But yeah, I'll have to think about that, Rachel, to see whether I can think of anything else that I might use that for. But nothing springs to mind.
Okay, thank you. We've got two more questions, one from Polly Atkinson and one from Colin Maitland, but I'm afraid we're running behind quite considerably. So Stephen, Francesca, can I ask you to answer those questions in the chat? If you don't know how to do that, then just we'll sort that afterwards. But I think we unfortunately have to move on to the next talk. So thank you so much for joining. And again, like, it was really, really enjoyable to just look at those images and those stunning objects.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Okay, so that leaves me with introducing the next speaker, who we've heard before. His name is Tony Harris. You will already know him. He's the digital media and photography manager at the Government Art Collection, and he will be talking about a new studio in the time of COVID. Tony, do you want to turn on your video and unmute yourself?
Yeah, it's still saying the host has stopped my video.
Yeah, sorry about that. There you go.
Okay. Right. Can everyone see me?
Not yet. It's still loading.
No.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Obviously, interesting time. So this is going to be a kind of a show and tell talk. So I've actually got paper slides rather than actual PowerPoint slides, simply because it's easier to swap between showing and telling and all that sort of thing. So at the beginning, I should say that I am, as Kira mentioned, the photography manager here at the Government Art Collection, and we place works of art in British government buildings around the world, in British embassies and Downing Street and ministers' offices and that kind of thing. And we've been building prior to and during COVID. So it's been quite challenging, obviously, and I'm now actually speaking here from my new photo studio, but everything is still in boxes, so it's not quite up and running yet, and I suspect we probably won't be up and running fully as a collection until the new year. Quick talk about my old studio. Now, I don't know whether you can see this. That's my first slide. So the old studio was 7 meters by 4.5, and the new studio here is 8.5 by 5.5 meters. So as part of the move to photography and to this building here, I thought it was a good idea to actually write a policy document on photography at the Government Art Collection. So why we do photography, what the purpose of photography is, and to define what the whole point of all this is. So that was a task I did during the first lockdown as well. So that was useful to do, to actually define more precisely all the wheres and wherefores for photography. So next slide is the building. So this is the building we've actually moved into. It's the building on the left. It's the old Admiralty building next to Horse Guards Parade, and it's obviously quite a historic building, so there's obviously challenges there around modifying a building for museum use. Now, we've only taken up a very tiny part of that building, so we're in just one small corner of it. So now you may have noticed that the studio is black, painted black. If I sort of spin around a little bit, you can see all the boxes of stuff that's yet to be unpacked, but basically it's black. Now, the old studio at Tottenham Court Road was black, and the reasoning behind that really is that quite a significant number of our works are glazed and will continue to be glazed. And you will notice that the work of art on the rack here by Larry Apatron is also glazed. You can see the reflection of the light And that's a factor that is difficult to get around. So the only way to really reliably do it is to have a black studio. I mean, you can shoot at 1 to 250th and that kind of thing, but black does really help to keep out all the reflections and velvet and that sort of thing around cameras. Now, I did consider possibly painting the sidewalls a kind of grey to aid light transmission and to possibly diffuse against. So I haven't yet ruled that out, and I might well possibly do that at some point. It's quite easy to basically paint a wall white. Now, you can also probably notice the windows here. Now the windows have got full blackout lines, so they do actually wind down and perfectly seal. I also was obviously involved in the power and data in this room, so there's various sockets all around that are, provisionally perfectly, well, hopefully perfectly placed for that. Now the thing I'm going to show you next is my movable screens. Now, my sister really should take the credit for this because she came up with the idea. So the idea was to, I've always shot on standard racking screens, and the standard racking screens are quite handy for mounting works of art on because basically they're the same everywhere. You can use works of art with J-hooks and wire and all sorts of things. So I've always used standard racks, so I wanted to have standard racks put in here. And what I've effectively come up with is a 2-screen rolling rack, and I'll just now show you what that is. So you can see the screen moves here. In this screen. So I have these 2 screens that basically will move into the position that I'm shooting against. They're set at 90 degrees, obviously, to the floor. So in terms of making more accurate, shooting, that's been quite useful as well. I do have a laser, a VersaLab laser align, which I found to be really useful, and it really cuts down all the sort of focus errors in corners. So I've already used that already, and it's an excellent device. Now, the screens can actually be moved together or apart, so you can have a very large work on there or just a small work, that kind of thing. So they're quite flexible from that point of view. The other thing to mention is these plan chests here. There's 2 plan chests here. One's in the far corner. And the idea behind them is that we needed extra storage for unframed works anyway. But I also, and there was lack of space elsewhere for those plan chests. So I suggested, why don't we put 2 in here on wheels and have a black, it's called Trespa top. And the idea behind them is that I can wheel these 2 plan chests together or singly, and I can actually then use it as a tabletop for shooting sculpture because we have a lot of marble busts and that kind of thing, and they are weight. The weight rating for the top is very good from that point of view, so they will easily support a 75 kilo marble bust. My old studio stand from Tottenham Road is still going. The Faber stand. I have got a new piece of the string here that makes the thing go up and down. So at some point I shall be replacing that. So that's kind of like part of a refurbishment. I also, in February before lockdown, but they didn't get delivered, unfortunately, because of lockdown, I got some new lighting. So I got broncolor lighting. So this is my lighting spec. Basically, I got the SkyOS pack, twin heads, and the soft boxes. I got the 1.8 meter soft boxes, as well as a small set for sculpture. So I'm basically hoping that all of this will allow me to really start to unpick the ISO standard for 2D works only, and that's really my studio. So I need to just leave you with the one last slide, which is our corporate slide. And you can find us all on social media, GoHartCol. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Ooh, thanks, Tony. I absolutely loved the low-key version of PowerPoint. That was brilliant. That really made me smile, and really good to see that you're finally in your studio. I think the audience seemed to have very much enjoyed the slides as well. Because we're running out of time, can I ask you if there are any questions for you to monitor the Q&A in the chat and get back to people that way? Is that okay, Tony?
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So for everyone in the audience, if you do have any questions for Tony, feel free to put them in either the chat or the Q&A, and he'll be having a look at that and answer it this way, because we're running a bit behind. So I think we should better get on with the next talk. The next talk is by Miglena Rajkowska and Christy Lee Seaton, who are both archaeologists, and they will be presenting a talk on documenting earthen architecture through the application of multiple photographic techniques. If I could ask the two of you to unmute yourself and turn on your video and share your screen. Great. Okay. So I think Miglena, you're sharing the screen. Is that right?
Sure. Yes. Just a second.
Yeah. Perfect. So I think you are on the last slide. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Can everybody see? Is everything all right?
Yeah, it's all good. Thank you.
Okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Miglena Rajkowska. I have a background in architecture and archaeology. And for the past 10 years, I have worked in the field of digital archaeology and documenting of immovable cultural heritage. And I work mostly with technical photography methods like photogrammetry, RTI photography, and gigapixel panoramic photography.
My name's Christy Lee Seaton, and I've just completed an MSc in digital archaeology from the University of York, and I was researching digital data reuse in archaeology. My research interests are digital recording methods, late antique Rome, and theoretical archaeology.
So in December 2019, Christy Lee and I traveled to central Iran to document Saryazd Castle. Our intention was to use digital photography methodologies with the aim to generate detailed documentation of the fortification at a specific point in time.
Okay, so the goals of the project were to document the fortress as it stands and to create a virtual tour which will be hosted online to promote tourism. The documentation created will also assist with ongoing restoration as well as providing an architectural survey. In cases like Saryazd, where the renovation process never stops, it's hard to draw the line between what's old and what's new. During restoration, there are certain rules which must be followed to guarantee a holistic and transparent approach. Due to the nature of mud brick, though, this isn't always possible because there are elements where entire constructive elements are lacking. And from what we've observed during our fieldwork, the restoration at Saryazd follows very traditional techniques, but it uses more modern materials. And so it's easily to distinguish these from the original structures. And this corresponds to the recommendations of the NARA document of authenticity. Ongoing documentation is crucial for projects of this size to help track the destructive processes, the various restoration stages, as well as where there's been human interference. So the village of Saryazd is located in central Iran, about 50 kilometers from the historical city of Yazd. Thanks to a constant water supply and fertile farming land, it was once the biggest village in the Yazd province. Today, the village has a small residential population, and on weekends, people sort of come as like a weekend getaway. One of the tourist attractions available to visitors when they're there is the Sayazd Castle. The castle was never the seat of any leader. Instead, it was built as a fortress where the local population could go when the town was under siege. The date of the construction is really open to debate. The local community accepts a date between the 3rd to the 7th centuries AD. However, some scholars have dated the castle to the Samani era between the 9th to the 10th centuries, just based on the architectural typology. The village of Sayazd was formed in the 8th century, which would suggest that the 9th to 10th century is probably more likely, but the earliest actual evidence that we have of dating is the Al-Mozaffar dynasty from the 14th century, with a further expansion during the Safavid dynasty in the 15th to 16th centuries. Sayazd Castle is a citadel surrounded by a moat with single entry via drawbridge. The fortress consists of inner and outer fortifications walls as well as defensive towers, that you can see one now. There are 3 floors of occupation with estimates of some 1,500 rooms. Many of the top levels have disappeared or sort of melted away, and we think that the number is probably closer to about 850 based on the remaining evidence. The rooms were primarily used to store valuable items, and a valuable item to them would be something such as grain. The complex was arranged according to a well-drafted, predetermined plan. The inner section consists of housing elements and storage rooms, which were spread alongside a central road with narrow pathways and corridors. Rooms are also located between the inner and outer fortification walls, but these were probably added at a later stage as the population within the walls actually grew. The rooms are very tight and small, but they do have shelving and niches built into the wall cavities. Iran's built heritage consists primarily of earthen architecture, and it remains a conventional construction technique that's still used today. Residential compounds, caravanserais, and defensive residential compounds like Sayazd protected communities against hazards arising from natural disasters, animals, and human threats. Spread throughout Iran, these buildings share similar functionality as well as ground plan and styles. Unfortunately, despite their importance for Iran's heritage, they do remain insufficiently studied by scholars. So we started a project to digitally document Sayazd Castle, which started in December 2019, in conjunction with the Iranian Federation of Tourist Guides Association. The aims were to document the castle as it currently stands. Gigapixel images were used to record the building at a specific point in time, and this information can be used in the future for preservation and conservation purposes. The imagery can also be used as a research tool by academics who are unable to physically attend the site. In the future, researchers can use gigapixel images to continue tracking the regress at the site. They can use the images to make further plans for conservation and reconstruction. And while working on the digital documentation of Sayazd, it became apparent that the monument suffers from many structural pathologies. The team created a short report of their origin and the dangers they represent for the stability of the complex and the architectural elements themselves. The site of Sayazd Fortress was attended for 6 days in December 2016, and the chosen techniques were 360-degree high dynamic range photography, gigapixel photography, and close-range photogrammetry. Throughout the project, a total of 30,428 photos were taken, which included 5 gigapixel panoramas and 78 360-degree panoramas, as well as 3 photogrammetric 3D models. This resulted in 268 gigabytes of storage and 98 hours of computer processing time.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that, but the battery is about to die. So, all right. So we had various challenges while working in Sayazd. The site looks and feels like a labyrinth, and the corridors are very narrow. Access to most of the rooms is complicated and in some places even dangerous. Having reliable equipment, which is easy to move around, is thus protected and can be remotely activated, makes the life of an archaeologist much easier. Most of the storage rooms in Sarjast have no access to light, especially those located on the ground floor. So HDR photography was the only way to cover the substantial light differences in an environment like this. The time frame for the project was also a challenge, only 10 working days and mentioned, including a survey of the site, photography, photogrammetry, and of course the processing time. We chose our equipment in a way that we could photograph as much as possible for a short time frame. This meant for us using robots. Also, since the site has some quite dangerous areas because they're not yet being reconstructed or they're not consolidated, we needed to be able to control the cameras remotely. So our equipment was, from Dr. Klaus, we had two robots, which are the Rodeon Pixplorer and the Pixplorer 500. For the gigapixel images and panoramas, we used the Rodeon Pixplorer with the Nikon D500 camera and a 105mm lens. And for the photogrammetry, we used the Nikon D750 with a 24mm lens. The Pixplorer 500 we used for the 360-degree panoramas because of its accuracy, high resolution, speed, but most importantly, because of its ability to shoot in complete darkness. So it has integrated light, LED light that can be set to different strengths, and to our experience, that works effectively even on half capacity in the darkest rooms. In total, we took 5 gigapixel panoramas. These images record the external fortress walls, so the elevations, one for each north, south, east, and west, and one overlooking the rooftop from the north tower. Currently, there is no documentation of the elevations, so cultural heritage specialists like architects, archaeologists, or conservators can use those images to view the site at this specific point in time, which can help them develop a crack detection analysis or other structural pathologies. So as Christy mentioned, we had lots of photos taken. We processed for 98 hours, and we had to process everything there on site because it was impossible to transfer this information later on back to Iran. The 78 360-degree panoramas include 18 panoramas on the external wall, so outside the fortress, and 60 internal panoramas on the inner fortification section, and about maybe 50 of the rooms, the storage rooms that are inside. Each panorama is about 500 megapixels in size. Areas which were dangerous or unacceptable were not photographed and will be attempted in the second stage of the project, which we'll hope will happen soon. A virtual museum will be created, and the eventual aim is to document all the 850 rooms which are currently preserved. The 360 images can also be used as a research tool by academics who are unable to attend the site physically. Much like the gigapixel images, researchers can track any regress at the site to make plans for conservation and future reconstruction. The virtual tour, which we built with the 360-degree panoramas, allows visitors to access the site from abroad and to experience user-friendly narratives. Moreover, such data is a digital archive which preserves the knowledge and conditions of the site at a certain point in time, such as in a museum setting. Also, virtual environment allows remote viewing of those spaces that are difficult or impractical to access physically or do not exist anymore. The charm of Sarjast is in the stories told and hospitality shared. There are many castles in central Iran, though by our perception and the conversation that we had with other visitors there, none have that magical quality of Sarjast. As in the video here, you can see the host, the caretaker of the site, Mr. Hussein, who prepares the famous Farsi tea every morning and relays stories to the tourists about the castle. So the objective of the second stage of Digital Saryast is to extend the virtual tour, adding more panoramas of renovated rooms, and to tell the intergenerational stories of the locals to the public, creating a narrative for online visitors. The virtual guided tour will allow visitors who have never been to Saryast before to walk there virtually. And the project aims to create not just a virtual visit, but more a museum exhibition revealing importance of this particular heritage. And the last part of our project was the close-range photogrammetry, which was very important for our preparation for the second stage of the project. It will serve as a base for a future graphic reconstruction. The areas that we shot were chosen by the state of their preservation. There is not much written about the history of Saryast, and what exists currently is mainly in Farsi, which made history research for our team almost impossible. And so we prefer to work on areas where architectural survey could fill in the gaps of the missing elements. We worked on the water cistern, which you can see on the left, a two-story house, and parts of the eastern inner fortification area, which is on the right. We did the photogrammetry using the strip method, with the camera being handheld. And but unfortunately, we were not able to use any georeferencing devices like a total station or a GNSS. So everything had to be scaled using simple printed targets. The photogrammetry took 2 working days and about 1,600 images. And we're currently working on the graphic reconstruction of these areas, and we hope that in the next months we will be ready with this task.
So Saryast Castle is a typical example of intangible and immovable Iranian heritage. The castle is a unique example of architecture and planning. Its importance to the local community is demonstrated through their commitment to restoring the castle and solidifying its architectural elements. There is a lack of publicly available documentation, as Meglena mentioned earlier, and this is why the Digital Saryast project was born. We hope that by creating a digital record, the importance of the castle can be recognised and studied by future scholars. The main goals of the project were to create a documentation archive which can serve future projects and promote study of the site. And the second was to create a platform to promote the site to new visitors and generate income for the preservation of Saryast. We feel that we met our goals, but there is so much more that we can do. Future opportunities include extending the existing survey, but also employing new types of techniques. Recent publications on fortress castles in Iran can provide a basis for reinterpretation, and we would like to explore new avenues for engaging with broader audiences using the narratives that Meglena discussed, and this will ensure the future of Saryast. We'd also like to acknowledge that the Digital Saryast project would not have been possible without our hosts from the Iranian Federation of Tourist Guides Association, in particular, Pega Latifi and Mohsen Haji Saeed. Pega and Mohsen have been a great support throughout the project, and we'd like to thank them for their support and their passion for protecting Iranian heritage. Yeah, so thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much to both of you. That's really, it looks like an absolutely fascinating site. Yeah, if it was a bit easier to visit, I think you've probably just changed some people's plans of what's on their bucket list. So I think we've got time for 1 or 2 questions. So if anyone's got a question, feel free to type them in the chat or the Q&A. There's offering to give you a hand. Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that way. So Colin Maitland.
We'll have this in mind.
Pardon?
We'll have this in mind. Thank you.
So Colin Maitland is asking, why did you have to process on site?
So there are limitations because of the sanctions with Iran. There's limitations on the kind of technology that they have, and things like internet connections are very poor. So as you could imagine, trying to upload 268 gigabytes to transfer for files for them to download is near impossible. So making sure that we processed everything on site and we left behind like a hard drive with all of the data on it. It's not something that we could easily ship to Iran because of the sanctions. So it just made it more sense to actually do everything on site and leave it there ready for them to start using.
Great. Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Don't believe they are. So in that case, thank you so much to the two of you. I believe you've also left your email addresses in the presentation. Yes. Is that right? Great. Okay. So if people want to get in touch with you, they can review this video and get in touch with you that way. So yeah, thank you very much. And then that leaves me with introducing our last speaker of the day. Her name is Dani Targan, and she currently works as a freelance photographer, and she will be talking about photographing in Tello, Iraq.
Hello, can you see me? Okay, yep. Cool. Let me share.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Yeah, thanks, Dani.
Okay, no, thanks, Kira. So I've been going to Tello, South Iraq, as a lead photographer for the past 4 years, and I'm normally not there. I'm normally there in November. I'm not there today, well, because of the current situation, of course. Tello, the ancient Sumerian city of Girsu, is one of the earliest known cities of the world. Tello is a megasite extensively investigated between 1877 and 1933. In response to the destruction of a heritage site in Iraq and Syria by Daesh in 2015, the British Museum developed the Iraq Scheme. It delivers training in all aspects of archaeological fieldwork. This includes archaeological, geophysical and geometric surveying, conservation and photography, to complex excavation methodologies. The training gives participants the expertise and skills they need to document and stabilize severely disrupted and damaged heritage sites in preparation for potential reconstruction. So one of my roles as the lead photographer of the excavation is to give training to the Iraqi participants. The training on site is based on photographing trenches, and we have several categories at Tello of trench photography, and I mainly as a photographer, focus on showing them how to prepare to photograph the final publication images. As the time window for producing those images is very tight, every shot has to be planned in the minute detail. And I see it as planning for a film shoot, really. I storyboard everything I go to the site many times, so you were seeing some images of me that I took going to the site and producing those shots that are analyzed together with the director of the excavation. And then because at the end there is very little time to photograph. So like this image was is the final image of the bridge. The second one, as you can see, the sun on the left-hand side is already peeping in, and then you can see it's already showing the sun signs on the trench that I was supposed to be documenting. There's also documentation. So that's me here photographing with the archaeologist. So again, planning every little details. I'm using a pole. We do have the drone, but it's not the same quality. Obviously, we have a raw file, so it's easier to play with. And here is me photographing exactly. It's all planned as a study for the final images that are here then on the day. I have very short window, as I said. And there is also documentation of the excavation. In this case, is the extraction of a cone on a mud brick. This was a rare occasion where the two photographers were on site at the same time, because one is always in the dig house studio shooting the daily findings. So these are the final images. And these are the things that I showed the trainees as well, the participants. And here's just me photographing, having a site documentation. And in this particular occasion, it's more like a recce shot. This is the next area on site, which is, the site is huge, it's 400 hectares square. And this is going to be the next area to be excavated. So light and time of the day in that, for those images are not really that important because they are just references. Sometimes here the challenge is to merge the archaeologist need with the culture and heritage photography standards, because here, you know, is a very narrow trench, a canal study, and that needs to show its layers, as you can see on the left-hand side. And so it was very hard to do that. I took, I think, 4 or 5 shots, and the camera, I was holding the camera on the same pole that you saw me before, but this time I was holding it horizontally because I could not fit in myself and the camera to be able to have enough focus. And it's funny because I learned so much with this image. It's an image that for me, as a cultural and heritage photographer of these standards, I tried to put the color patch there, the gray card, and on the right hand side you see just as a quick shot to the reference and what it was produced on the left. So yeah, massive challenge. But luckily, the excavation director is really keen on photography, Sebastian Ray from the British Museum, and not only appreciate my creative input, but he also encourages. So here's a set of images that he commissioned me to take in response to the images that Ursula Schulz-Dornberg took of Iraq in the 90s, and her images were going to be part of an exhibition at the British Museum called No Man's Land. So I'm very lucky to not only photograph very tough things, but I can interpret them as well. And here is me just creating another project that I called Abstractello. Sometimes I'm on site, just hanging around, trying to document. The light is obviously not very good, but then I came up with this series, and then the director really likes, so he's keeping it. And this one in particular is amazing because it's a light painting of the site at 3 a.m. And our escorts didn't like much, the archaeological police didn't like much the fact that 3 a.m. we were photographing. But yeah, this is the result. So yeah, I can do this kind of amazing shots as well. But not only of trenches, I train the participants, and I not only take pictures of trenches, there is object photography as well. And so I train them with the basic lens. I give them the basics, so it's how to use the cameras and the lenses and color correct, and try to teach them how to do use the maximum of soft lighting, available lighting. This is me giving them some training in the dig house and showing them the studio. So this is the studio. This is I have to apologize for the images that are of the studio or any shots of the setups, because honestly we don't have time, and sometimes I remember to take a really quick snapshot with my mobile phone. Everything is really in a rush, so I apologize, but this is the studio. Nowadays I managed to paint some of the walls in white, and because beige is not my favorite color for photography in my studio. This is basically the equipment that I have. The participants kind of have this similar equipment, so it's meant for them to know that what they have we can use as well. These are, I'm going quickly because I know that the time is pushed anyway. So this is the studio, some of the shots that I'm taking there, and this is what I can produce in the studio. So basically here I'm showing a documentation image and a publication creative shot of the same cylinder seal. Everything is planned. These images, I'm showing you star objects. So star objects are always selected with the director. We go through every single detail and discuss everything. If they need to be stacking, both of those images I use the stacking. And even the view of which side of the cylinder seal is decided with the director. And here is just 2 different views of the same image, and this is the, so you just saw on the left hand side previously, that's actually this object being photographed, and this is a photo stacking. So it's a creative shot with a photo stacking. Not every creative shot needs photo stacking. So for instance, this one is another seal on the seal that I didn't do, it wasn't needed. But here it's a documentation image that we also use as stacking. So you can see that this object it is a very important object. I not only photographed it in many different views, but in different ways of photography as well. And all of them are in photo stacking. And this is how it looks on a plate. So there is, the conservator always put the cylinder seals on molds, and then I have to photograph the molds. And then after in Photoshop, I put them together. And here are some examples of other star objects that I have a little bit more liberty. I don't need to do something so precise as the cylinder seals. They are, some of them I managed to do as close as possible in the studio without Photoshop in the background. But as you saw, my setup is it's not almost impossible actually. Like this one, yeah, basically as it is, some just tidying up. This one as well. I normally photograph thinking how it's gonna look on Photoshop. So I try to foresee things. So I leave the shadows when I'm post-producing. I really like to leave the original shadows. I think it gives a really good idea that is not that fake, because it's not. And this is another object that's really nice, because he actually asked me to do this, the image on the right hand side, but because he's quite flexible, I saw the potential of showing the quality of this amazing vase and came up with this other way. And yeah, so he likes both. So it's a very nice way of working together. And this is the final image of the team. So every end of season, we photograph the team, and I try to come up with a funny way of photographing the team. And that was the last year. So that's me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Danny. That was really interesting. I think also quite complementary to the talk we had before. So we've got a few minutes for questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question for Danny, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I think, so there's one from Colin Maitland. He's asking, could you tell us about staff, living and security conditions in the big house, please?
Well, we have 24 hours escort all the time. We are not allowed to leave. We are in house arrest all the time there. We live in the house. We're 16 people normally. We only go out to the sites to photograph or during the day with escort and come back. So that's the living conditions. So security 24/7, yeah.
Do you want to elaborate a bit more on why that is? Why? So like I've worked in Egypt and we had the same arrangement, but obviously not every country is as strict as that.
I think the main problem, what I've heard, that's not official, it's kidnapping, because all the objects are in the house, and until we give them to the Baghdad Museum or the local museum. So I think it's basically that. It's for the objects, it's for obviously it's our safety, but it's because we are just bargain for the objects.
Right, okay, so it's as much for the security of the objects as it is for the security of the people working on it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Are there any more questions from the audience? Anyone's got more questions? I don't think that's the case. So thank you so much, Danny. Thank you very much for your presentation and taking the time to join us.
No, sorry for the mishap with the technology.
Don't worry, that's these things happen. So yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So that leaves me with concluding the last online event of our series in November. I very much hope you enjoyed them. I certainly did. I think it was the first time we've ever done anything online, so hopefully that was acceptable to all of you. We'll probably be asking you all for feedback, because if we have to do anything like this again, or if we decide to, then it would be really, really good to hear what you enjoyed, what we could have done better. And yeah, in general, just let us know what we can do to help you and support you, because that's what we're here for. So yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, the video hopefully will be online soon, and that leaves me with wishing you yeah, a good 2020 and what's left of it, and hopefully a Christmas that isn't too overshadowed by the current situation. And I will see you all in the new year. Take care. Bye.